vintage lovers, I'm Emily Stokel, and this is Preloved Podcast, the show about rad vintage style and guests you'll want to go thrifting with. Today I'm chatting with Sherry Pavlovich of the blog Confessions of a Refashionista. Sherry is a DIY diva and the creator of her blog Confessions of a Refashionista, where she showcases step-by-step upcycling tutorials. Sherry and I had a chat about DIYs and upcycling, thrift stores across the world, and how to have fun putting your own spin on thrifted clothes. This was a really fun chat, and Sherry is doing great work in this space. I hope you enjoy. Hey there, Sherry. Welcome to Preloved Podcast. I'm so excited that we're going to sit down today and talk about thrifting, DIY, upcycling, and all that jazz. If you can just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, that'll kick us off and get us started.
Groovy. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love a Preloved Podcast and am really it's such a pleasure to chat with you. As I've said in our little pre-chats that my background is a little bit different from the kind of norm. I actually didn't start thrifting or creating until I was out of the house, because growing up, secondhand was kind of a bad word in my house, which is odd, because I've always loved secondhand and handmade, but it wasn't until I left home that I was allowed myself even to kind of explore thrift stores and charity shops and really get going on this kind of lifelong career of thrifting.
Definitely. And so even it's so hard to believe because you are just like a DIY tutorial queen. So that was something that you picked up, it sounds like a little bit later on in your life. So what inspired you to start thrifting when you did start and then to start playing around with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, really, as I just said, it really was when I left home. I was always jealous in school of the girls who seemed to have all of the cool stuff and who were actually allowed to go to thrift stores and charity shops. And this is kind of way back in the 80s when it really wasn't cool to be doing that. But I thought the cool girls were the ones that were allowed to do that. And then, so as I said, when I left home, I mean, that's where I headed first, was to the thrift and charity shops. And again, being a very poor student, that absolutely did. Yes, it made those, waitressing tips go a lot farther. And again, as I just said, this was back in the 80s, early 90s when everything really was priced to sell in thrift and charity shops. So, you would get a set of dishes for $1, like a full set. And they were usually very funky 1970s ones. But again, it wasn't until even later in life that I began sewing after my kind of career in entertainment and my lucky modeling contract to Japan when I was in my early 20s and spending a lot of time, quite a few years there in the fashion industry that really kind of got my interest in fashion supercharged. And then from there, I moved on to London, England, and did acting and stand-up comedy, and I sang in a pump band and then taught English to pay the bills. And from there, I moved on to Greece and had my own bilingual entertainment magazine for the island that I lived on. So that was quite cool and got me more into the behind the scenes and designing. And then I moved on to Berlin, Germany for nearly a decade. And that is where I finally picked up sewing when I inherited a very, very vintage machine from my husband's great aunt. And taught myself how to use it. And the rest is kind of history.
You are definitely a woman of the world, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I want to ask you about this sewing machine. So I love that even the sewing machine that you learned on was vintage. That's so cool.
Well, in high school, again, this is way back, they used to force us children to learn sewing and baking and cooking and all of this. Just the girls, mind you. The boys got to have fun with power tools. So, Yeah, and I really spectacularly failed that class. Like I really did. It was like shocking. I could not, make a cookie that wasn't burnt. I couldn't sew a straight line on paper because that was the big test, to sew a straight line on paper. Yeah. So it's quite funny, the background I come from of having no secondhand, not allowed to be creative, failing, sewing classes. And then now it's your world. Exactly. Yeah. The vintage sewing machine, even when I inherited it from Großtante Inge, it was really, this thing was at least 55 pounds. And, those, like from 1945, those huge metal ones. And the first table we put it on broke because it was so heavy. And it was really that kind where, you start sewing and it's like, ka-chunk, 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 like it's going to eat you. It was really terrifying. And again, the instructions were, of course, all in German. And of course. And when I inherited it, I hadn't really been in Germany long enough to have such good German that I could easily translate a sewing machine manual. Yeah. So my boyfriend, who's now my husband, had to really help me a lot with translating that. And again, manuals don't translate well. I mean,
right. Yeah.
But like I said, taught myself to use it. And I just started kind of revamping the clothes in our own closets and found I kind of had a talent for it.
Yeah. And so I love that you taught yourself this, like you said. And I know that that's a big thing that you talk about on your blog, that you think DIY is something that you can tackle in small steps and that anyone can pick up. So can you talk about that a little bit and like your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Like you said, all over my site, personally, I think my tutorials are very, very, very beginner friendly. And because I was a teacher, I do thankfully have that ability to kind of word things correctly and take the right kind of pictures and make the right kind of videos to make everything as simple as humanly possible. And again, I really haven't been doing this that long, only about 6 years. And so a lot of the things that I am showing, I'm actually learning as I am taking the pictures, as I'm shooting the video. It's all new to me too. Like every tutorial that I produce is the first time I'm actually doing it. Yeah, I think that really does help too. So I'm teaching myself at the same time as I'm teaching others, if that makes sense.
Right.
No, I really do think that anybody can do anything if they put their mind to it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the mission behind why you do your DIYs and tutorials in an upcycling fashion and why you think listeners should try it out?
Well, I have a better question for you.
Shoot.
Why don't people upcycle?
Not? Yes, exactly.
Why don't they do it anymore? In the past, this was the way of life for everyone, regardless if you were wealthy or if you were, living below the poverty line. Everybody upcycled. It was just, that's what people did. And it's always interesting when you kind of look back into it's quite a recent history, that the society changed into this more kind of consumerist, and I always have to keep up with the Joneses, as they say, and have everything new. It's just really within the last few decades that has happened. Whereas in like our grandparents, our great grandparents' time, they used everything. And then they reused it until they couldn't use it anymore. And so for me, that's kind of how I live my life, and that's really what I try to instill in my daughter as well, is that just because your shirt's missing a button doesn't mean you chuck it out. That's ridiculous.
So what's some advice you would give to people if they're looking to get started on this journey?
Well, visit my site, of course.
Definitely. And we'll make sure that all that's linked down below so you can get all the resources and gems.
I would say just don't be afraid because we only have one life really, and if you kind of let yourself be held back that, I'm afraid if I cut up this shirt that I'm not going to be able to fix it again, or if I'm afraid that I'm going to sew my finger, or I'm just afraid that I can't do it, I mean, it's ridiculous because this is the beauty of upcycling, right? Is you're reusing something. Everything that you do that is upcycled is 100% one of a kind and unique. Right. So at the end of the day, you might make a mistake, but no one will know you made that mistake.
Right. That's just the design.
Yeah, there's no patterns. There's no rules to follow. And I say this often in my tutorials, like I chose to use belts, for example, to kind of embellish my boots. But you go ahead and use yarn or use buttons or use whatever the hell you have on hand. This is what I'm all about, is go to thrift stores. By all means, fantastic. Use secondhand stuff, but look at what you already have in your house first.
That's great advice. Do you have a favorite upcycle you've made or a favorite story behind a special piece?
Yes. Well, with literally hundreds.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to pick,
tutorials.
Choose your babies.
Yeah. I do really love any and all of my granny square quilt tutorials, because for a few years I've been trying to learn how to crochet and knit, and my fingers just, don't like that very much. So I go to the thrift store and I find these little quilts that are made with love and transform them into, cozy sweaters. And yeah, so I really love those ones. But I think my absolute favorites have to be the items that I have made for my kiddo over the years, the furniture items.
So special.
We transformed a vintage bed and dresser into a outdoor playhouse and a covered sandbox for her when we still lived in Berlin. Yeah. And again, all these tutorials are easily found over on my site, step by step, showing in meticulous detail how we did everything. As well as most recently here in Toronto, we found an antique stand-up radio on the side of the road. And yeah, and it was missing all the components, of course. It's amazing what people check out here. But, I saw it and said, I think we need to bring this heavy thing home because I have an idea. And we transformed it into a fancy entertainment center.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. Mm-hmm. So excited to go over and check out all of those tutorials. You're just inspiring me to get started.
Awesome. That's the deal. Yeah. That's the goal.
So where do you go for inspiration? This is a question I like to ask all my Preloved podcast guests. Who inspires you? Whose style are you loving? And where do you go to seek that creative inspiration?
Yeah, believe it or not. And again, I don't want it to sound like, I have such a big ego or whatever. My own head, really. I think with a lot of creative people, especially those of us who have anxiety, our brains never, ever shut off. And so I literally have notebooks that I carry around with me. My phone is always full of little voice notes of just ideas that keep popping up into my head when I see things. And my husband, actually, he will say to me, okay, I got this. We're not cutting it. We're not destroying it. We're not making it into something new. This is mine. So I really wish I could shut it off sometimes, because I will, wake up at 1 a.m, just, I have this great idea. And if we get this and if we find this, then I can make it. And so that's really where my inspiration does come from. I think it's maybe as I'm walking around, my brain is filing things away, that I see. And then later on, it just pops up kind of unbidden to the front of my brain.
and then you've got to make it.
And then I have to make it. Yeah. I mean, as far as fashion designers and trends, I don't follow any of that. I'm a big supporter of, find your own unique style and you do you, and don't really try to copy others, because we're all one of a kind. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
So I have some questions for you, my dear. I'm quite curious. Yes. And now I know from listening to your podcast and reading through your blog how your kind of sustainable fashion, eco-fashion, pre-loved lifestyle all began, which is awesome. But I want to know, what do you DIY and upcycle?
Yeah, so I have recently become really inspired to do it a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
I am not the DIY queen that you are. I do not claim it, and I'm gonna try it more. I wish I could do more, and you're really encouraging me to start taking those steps.
Awesome.
So the funny thing is that my grandma, who I was really close to growing up, she was a seamstress, and she would tailor other people's clothes. She, made dresses for me.
Awesome.
Just had like this amazing, she could make anything from nothing.
Exactly.
And she tried to teach me many, many times to sew. But I don't have a lot of like tactile patience, like what you were saying of having it be in your head and then transforming it out onto like real life.
Right.
Really, really struggle with that. What I can do is I can use the sewing machine to patch a hole. I can sew a button on,
Awesome.
and I can chop stuff with scissors. And so I've been kind of inspired lately to do a little more of the chopping with scissors. And so I don't do a lot, but I'm gonna try a little more.
I shall send you my No-Sew Refashions ebook.
Yes.
My gift to you.
Yes.
I will send it today.
Oh, you're sweet.
So,
That's the level that I'm at now.
But it's awesome, and it's so much better and well ahead than a lot of people nowadays. Just simply having the ability to sew on a button seems to escape too many people.
Yes,
but
true.
As you're talking about thrifting, let's not go off that topic. When you are at thrift and charity shops and swaps or wherever, do you have a list with you, or do you kind of prefer the pre-loved hunt?
Yeah, good question. So I definitely go thrifting because I love the hunt. So I want to see everything and I go to every single section. But I do have a list, and that list stops me before I buy. So kind of my thing is that like I can get excited just by like seeing the cool things.
Oh yeah.
And I'll talk about this a little bit more too, like that's what I love about Instagram is like I can get the buzz like seeing what cool things other people find. So I just want to like see it all. I want to go to every section of the store, but I certainly cannot bring all of that home with me.
Yeah.
So then the list comes in is like, this is what I need.
Yeah.
And then I'm not buying something that I have 10 other just like it at home just because I saw it and it was cute, So that helps cull out to the actual purchase stage. But I do go look at everything.
So yeah, you're clever. You're clever. Let's just say you're a clever thrifter. Yeah. Speaking of that, is there anything though that regardless if it's on your list or not, you just can't say no? Like for me, it's vintage sequin anything.
Mine is like very 70s true boho dresses like that. That is my weakness. I just picked one up this last weekend. It's like a true 1970s. It fits like it was made for me.
Oh, perfection.
It's got bell sleeves. I love like a big dramatic sleeve, kind of long and like laces up in the front, and like I could just have limitless of those kinds of dresses. It doesn't even bother going on the list because if it is a good, true hippie dress, it's yours with me. Yeah.
So do you you go thrifting a lot to different stores? I'm guessing from your vast and wonderful Instagram page that I stalked more than a little bit. And do you find that there's a contrast, like an obvious contrast between shopping at thrift stores and charity shops, like something like, a large chain thrift store versus kind of the small one-off ones?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also too, I should say I'm in the Midwest in kind of like a mid-sized city. And so it's also probably really different here than it is I know it is from when I've gone thrifting in bigger cities too, especially in terms of the price. That would be one big thing. But here, we've got some really lovely curated boutique-y vintage shops, and I love those. Also the like typical charity shop, like I'm definitely a big Goodwill thrifter, but it does kind of bum me out when I'm going to Goodwill and I'm looking through the racks and all I find are fast fashion pieces that really aren't that old.
Absolutely.
That can get you down. And I try to like think of that as the positive side of that is if you aren't into real vintage, et cetera, et cetera. You can go to the thrift store and you can stay very current. You can stay very trendy and thrift. So I'll kind of focus on that like it's approachable and accessible rather than being
instead of getting depressed.
Pieces are, that they're turning over so quickly, because that is kind of the downside of going into a place like Goodwill and seeing that things have made it to the Goodwill that were in Target in the summer. That's I think the biggest thing that I'm noticing in the States. And I know people who come thrifting here in the States comment on that when they go to the big, massive box thrift stores. We should say that you're located in Toronto area.
Yeah. And
so tell us a little bit about the difference there.
Well, we can even get into, because I did spend the last 22 years in Europe and Asia. It's the reverse culture shock was massive, but even more so with the thrift and charity shops, I was so shocked because when I had left North America, it was, it wasn't cool back then in the mid 90s. It was still, this kind of like, secondhand is gross. Well, and it's so now to return and see that the prices are insane for secondhand items. And I'm not talking about in the boutique kind of curated stores. You expect that, right? It's like the people, they're going and they're sourcing it. And sorry, but they do deserve to be paid for their time and for cleaning and for mending. Of course they do. I'm talking strictly about the thrift stores and the so-called charity shops here. That everything is donated. It's all free. And still the prices are more expensive than fast fashion. That it has now become this real kind of just a money-making venture. And it even is with the large chain charity shops here. It is the same kind of thing as with the kind of for-profit thrift stores. The one-off small charity shops are still awesome. There's near me, there's one that all the money goes to the animal charities.
Oh, great.
And there's no clothing item in there is over $2.
Yeah.
Which is kind of how I think thrift stores should be. It should be like in Europe. How things are priced is basically not like, if this was in a store, it would be this much. So let's just knock off $1 and hang it up. No. Things are priced to get rid of items, which I think it really is how it should be in the rest of the world as well. When only about 20% of donated items make it onto the thrift shop floor, there's a problem.
No, you're absolutely right, because then they're not getting, people think that they are giving it to the charity shop, for example, and it's getting a new home, but often it is getting shipped overseas and not actually making it to the shop floor of that charity shop. So it is kind of complicated.
Or worse, they're simply just chucking it.
Chucked. Right. So be particular about what you're doing with your things as you're Marie Kondoing your closets this spring, everyone.
Exactly. I would say ask your friends if they want it first. Go to a swap.
A little swap. Or organize one in your area.
Or do one at the local community center. There's people love that kind of stuff nowadays.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And then you get to find your community of fellow thrifty lovers.
Absolutely. So I know, as we're just talking about Europe and in particular Berlin, I lived there for nearly a decade and you traveled there. So I think we probably went to maybe a few of the same secondhandy type shops at some point. Maybe we even saw each other. That would have been hilarious.
Who knows?
So while you were there, did you notice any of the differences that I noticed?
Yeah, so people are always asking me about thrifting in Europe because I'm always gushing about, I've done 3 big, month-long backpacking trips there.
Right.
And love it. But I didn't, unfortunately, get to do a lot of shopping because I was living out of a backpack. So I had to carry everything that I had. So I did a lot of browsing, and some beautiful places over there. Something I love in Europe is the culture of fleas every weekend.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. That's so fun for the browsing, just somewhere to go stroll around as well. And I went to lots and lots of cute shops, like I said, but I wasn't doing a ton of buying. But I really encourage everybody to go and check it out. The other funny thing that is so interesting that I always picked up on when I was over there would be the like how much everyone would adore to get like US brand items, like your Champions, your Levi's, your Adidas, things like that. You would spot those. Those would be on like the very curated rack in the front. And,
Yes.
I always would notice that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the thing that I love the most, especially just from a perspective of like browsing around, and like I said, like I like to look at everything, was the cool fleas. There's especially a culture for that in Germany. And I loved those outdoor flea markets. What about you?
Well, I mean, I because I was there for so long, I actually found all of the 100% true and real charity shops, not just these, the secondhand Laden speaking German, so the secondhand stores that resell things. Like I said, they genuinely are for the people and by the people over there, and the prices do reflect that. And one that I frequented a lot is the Sozialladen, which literally means social store. And I mean, I think it was every second Tuesday, they had a €1 day, and they had had 2 stores, and literally all textile items like clothing items were €1 or less. And
love it.
You could even get, like, we got a full kitchen, because in Germany, when you move in somewhere, there's not necessarily a kitchen in the kitchen. And it doesn't come equipped with that. You have to bring it yourself. Decided, okay, we're going to hit the Sozialladen and see what they have. And we got this awesomely cool green Landhaus, which I'm forgetting the English word, country style. There it is. Country style kitchen with beautiful knobs and everything for €50. And it had, and that was including the double sink, which was, the beautiful old porcelain enamel. It just everything, and like cupboards for up on the wall, countertops for €50. I mean, of course, we had to install it ourselves, but hey, it was worth it.
Absolutely. That is so cool that you were able, because you think that would probably have just gotten chucked here.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And that you were able to put that in your home and love it and make it yours.
Yeah. But again, I think as well in Europe, they are so further ahead compared to North America when it comes to upcycling and sustainability and just the eco lifestyle in general. I mean, even like here in Canada, we kind of have, two bins, the garbage and the recycling, and recently organics has also come into play, which is good. But in Germany in particular, they have 4 different bins. So you actually separate everything yourself, and the trucks come around and they pick it up and it goes where they say it's going to go, which is awesome.
Well, and this is the thing, we chatted about this a little bit, but like, you say something like an idea like that and people think, oh, well, that could never work, but it's working elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or that's so far-fetched, or maybe in a decade, but it's working so well elsewhere.
And it's not just working, it's like been there for decades already.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And I think, something else is there's so many shows in Europe as well that are all about upcycling. Whereas here in North America, there's some makeover TV shows and stuff. And there's, like, oh, hey, we'll redo your garden, but they're not reusing stuff. It's not specifically about upcycling. Whereas in Europe, these shows totally rock, and they're awesome, and they're very accessible to everyone. It's not just like, oh, you need to have the most expensive power tools and a full-on workshop. They really do show you, as I try to do on my site, how easy it is to recreate things with items that you already have.
I love that. That is our send them out for the day, recreating items that you will love to have with things that you already have. And I'm feeling inspired, and I bet the listeners are feeling inspired too, to give it a shot.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry. This was so fun. I'm glad we got to connect and chat about all of this.
Absolutely. And I'm sure at some point in the future, we shall actually be able to go thrifting in person as well.
Definitely.